Welcome to Bruce Hurwitz Presents Meet the Experts. I'm your host, Bruce Hurwitz of Hurwitz Strategic Staffing. You can find us on the web at hsstaffing.com. I hope you consider us for all your staffing, career counseling, and professional writing needs. I'm delighted to be joined today by Dr. Dan McMillan. We're going to be discussing money and politics. Meet the Experts is sponsored by P&K CPAs. P&K is a full-service accounting firm. They provide accounting and consulting services to businesses ranging from startups to small and mid-cap companies to nonprofits, as well as high net worth individuals. Contact them today for a free consultation at info@pk-cpas.com or call them at 973-882-8810. They will be happy to be of service. Dan, welcome to the show.
It's good to be with you, Bruce. Thank you very much for having me.
And with your permission, we will forego the doctors, because if I'm calling you doctor and you're calling me doctor, before we know it, the show will be over. So
yeah, it's kind of tiresome.
It's
just that history Ph.D. at Columbia was a lot of work. It is kind of nice to have it acknowledged at least once.
I understand. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
I am glad that we're able to do this, because this morning I didn't think we would, because I woke up with a cold. But I welcome you again. Take a moment or two, please, and introduce yourself to our viewers.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. So my name is Dan McMillan. I'm founder and executive director of Save Democracy in America, which is a not-for-profit and strictly nonpartisan campaign with one goal, and that is to get big money out of politics, or at least rein it in enough so that we, the people, have a voice, using a reform called voter-owned elections. That is, our entire goal is to establish a voter-owned election system for federal elections. It is a public financing mechanism. The principle is simply this, that given that the only people now who have much voice in Washington are high-dollar campaign donors, we must make ourselves the donors. And so under this system, the government would give every registered voter, for every cycle, an online account of campaign cash. You can't take it out and spend it, but you assign it to the candidates you want to support. And that way, if you fund it robustly, any candidate who wants to serve us can draw on a large pool of campaign funds controlled by the voters, and has no excuse, on the other hand, to take money from big pharma, big oil, billionaires, and so on and so forth. And that is, in my view, having studied this for more than a dozen years, the quickest path we can take toward restoring government by the people.
I don't know if you're acquainted with it, and I don't know if it's still in effect, but in Canada, there was a law that each party would receive federal funds in proportion to their representation in Parliament. And that's how parties were able to fund their election campaigns. This sounds a little bit similar, seeing that the government would give money based on representation, and representation, of course, is based on the vote of the people.
There's a lot of, the logic is fairly similar. The notion is essentially that if you use public funds to pay for campaigns, then candidates can serve the people instead of serving private donors. We're suggesting this route because of the way, what we like about it is the way that it directly empowers the voters. Also, we're concerned that if we set up some kind of system where the government gives grants to the parties according to some formula, that incumbents might find a way to rig the system to preserve their incumbency. One of the beautiful things about this system, it's hard to imagine how you can rig it, because the key decision, that is, who gets how much money, is decentralized to 168 million registered voters. And I think the other part of why we like this system so much, why I've chosen to champion it among other options that have been proposed, is that it directly empowers each and every one of us. Right now, so many Americans feel very discouraged about politics. We feel we have no voice in Washington, by and large, because we have very little voice, and if any. And this literally puts the coin of political influence directly into the hands of each voter to do as each voter sees fit. And that affirms, our right as Americans to govern ourselves as a free people, as our founding fathers intended. And for that reason, I also think that it is probably politically more saleable, that we're going to get the support we need from voters for this system, doing it this way. But you're quite well informed, yes, that they do have that system in Canada.
I'm a Canadian, so I know. I'm also an American. And like the United States, Canada is also not a democracy. The United States is a republic, and Canada is a constitutional monarch, or a constitutional monarchy. And in 2005, I think it was, there was an election held. The Conservatives won, but could only form a minority government. And they decided that they were going to do away with the process I just described, and parties would no longer get federal funds based on representation. So the opposition decided that they were going to join together and kick the government out, which is the parliamentary system, and they'd form a new government. So the prime minister went to the governor general and told, I believe at the time the governor general was a woman, may be wrong, told her what was going to happen. And she said, no way, I won't allow it. And she froze Parliament. The way we have now, that nothing can happen because there's no Speaker of the House. There's a legal term for it. I don't remember what it is, but she suspended Parliament for, I think it was 6 weeks.
Really?
And after the 6 weeks were over, it was no longer an issue and life went on normally. My point is that in Canada, our safety valve is the monarch, or I was about to say her. Can't be blamed. I mean, for all my life, it was a queen. The monarch or his representative, the governor general. In the United States, we have a safety valve of the Senate and the filibuster. That's how the founding fathers wanted it. What is the safety valve for this system? Because I'm seeing people maybe spending all of their money in primaries and not have anything left for the general election.
Well, that you raise a good implementation point, and I think to avoid that, everyone's online account of this money, which we call voter dollars, will be divided into pockets. So a pocket for the primary, a pocket for the general, and also depending on which races you're eligible to vote in at the federal level. So obviously there would be an allotment for your representative in the House if there's a Senate race that year, which there is in 2/3 of the years, but not all 2/3 of the election years, but not all three. Not every election year. Then there would be a pocket for the Senate race, and likewise a primary and general election pocket for the presidency. And that's an important implementation question that you raise. It's a safety valve. It's interesting. I mean that you're right, quite right, that the founding fathers wanted the Senate there is a kind of anti-democratic feature to kind of put the brakes on sort of the public sort of changing its mind too quickly. They did not trust the voters, and the Senate was there in a way as a sort of way to apply the brakes. Filibuster is not in the Constitution, but that has also kind of served that function of applying the brakes. But the thing is, I guess I would say, well, I'm sort of going off in too much of a tangent, other than to say that when you look at periods of our history where the American people really were in the saddle, where you can say that we had government by the people, not perfectly, but to a large degree, the government functioned much better than it has for the last 40, 50 years in our country. And especially compared to it does today. Today, our federal government is breaking down in real time before our very eyes.
Over there behind my shoulder are a series of books written by a gentleman, I believe his last name is George. I'm not going to turn around. I couldn't see from this distance anyways. And it's all about, and you're going to know where I'm going with this, it's all about the relevance of mountain climbing to leadership.
Huh.
Now, you wrote that you have made 3 ascents of El Capitan in Yosemite Valley?
That's right.
Yeah, okay, yeah, okay. The highest rock wall in America. I'm not trying to be funny.
It would seem, all true what you're saying.
No, it would seem that this would be quite a battle to get this change in the electoral system, which I don't even know if it's I'm not a lawyer. I don't even know if it's constitutional. Do you think maybe your mountain climbing successes will help you overcome the obstacles that you're no doubt already facing and are bound to face in the future?
Well, I think that experience, because the Southwest face El Cap, to climb it takes 4 days to spend the nights on ledges, and that's very intimidating. And I guess
think so.
Because of that experience, I'm not really. There's just not a whole lot that intimidates me anymore. It's interesting. I actually see this. I mean, it's possible that this is a fight that I and my supporters don't win. It's possible that it's a fight that takes 20 years. But I'm actually pretty confident that we're going to win, and I see our victory as likely within as little as 4 or 5 years. And the reason I say this is that I think things have, I've been following our politics since I turned 20 in 1980, and I've seen the quality of our self-government, that is to say, the influence, the voice of the voters being sort of hollowed out, robbed of us, that we've been robbed of our voice by money more and more across this period. Now I feel the time has finally come when we can turn it around, and that is because the system is breaking down, because I think we've got a large majority of Americans on both sides of the aisle who say, and many of us have been saying for quite a long time, this isn't working. Some sort of fundamental change is needed. And I feel that this concept, voter-owned elections, although it's not going to completely drive money out of politics, it's not going to solve every problem we've got, because I argue that the way that politicians pay for their obscenely expensive campaigns is the biggest single thing that robs you and me of our say in our own government. Any leverage we get on that, on the money problem, brings very big benefits to us that Americans can see across the board. Americans of all political stripes will see benefits across the board. And so I feel in a way that the constituency for this reform is already out there, that you've got Americans across the board politically profoundly alienated from the system, wanting change. We've been saying for years we want change, but no one's ever showed us a path to change. And the reason none of the candidates in recent memory who have vaguely promised change in one way or another, hope and change, drain the swamp, Bernie Sanders promised a revolution. None of them had a plan for change, and that's because what needs changing above all is money in politics. And no candidate can fight the money because they're too busy raising the money. And so my argument is that voter-owned elections is the ingredient, the missing achievable goal, the missing plan for change that we needed all along. And so the issue is getting the word out. And that's my fundamental challenge. My belief is also, and I have a lot of experience and evidence that supports it, that this is a reform that is inherently attractive to Americans on both sides of the aisle, that it's something that absolutely can command robust bipartisan support. It has so many things going for it. But let me stop talking and give you a chance to get a word in edgewise, and I'm more than happy to expand on what I just said.
Well, it may have a lot going for it, but there's one thing it has going against it. And for the life of me, I can't remember. I'm just having, maybe it's the cold, maybe it's the senior moment, but I can't remember the Supreme Court decision. I do remember.
I'm guessing you're thinking about Citizens United?
Citizens United.
Okay, the reason that it's so important to you to take this path to reform is that the only path to reform that the courts will not strike down is some kind of public financing mechanism. Citizens United was one of a long string of cases that actually go all the way back to a founding case in 1976, where the court basically decided that money spent to purchase influence in Washington by influencing elections, by giving to candidates or spending to help candidates, that the money itself is free speech. I mean, up until 1976 in our country, I think in every country, free speech meant what you and I are doing now. We each state our views freely, and no one can lock us up in the middle of the night for doing so. It never included the money that you might spend to purchase an audience for your speech, like say in a media buy, much less to drown out the speech of everyone else, which is basically what special interests have done to your vote and mine, my voice, your voice and mine in politics today. Accordingly, the courts will not let us limit anyone's donating and spending. But, so the only path to fundamental reform is some kind of public financing mechanism that just makes an alternative pool of money available to candidates. But among those public financing mechanisms, the one that I think is ironclad, protected against being blocked by the Supreme Court, because the court's whole premise in all these decisions is we want robust, free political speech. Therefore, we don't want limits to anyone's political spending because they should be able to exercise their free speech rights. Well, voter-owned elections gives the power of political speech to all, 168 million registered voters, Americans, almost all of whom did not have that power before because they didn't have enough cash lying around to give to candidates. And so so it's great that you raised that issue, and thank you. That's why, I spent a decade researching and writing a book about money in politics, looking for a solution. I put all my chips on this one, in part because it is the one that we don't see, and I've consulted with many experts in constitutional law. It doesn't seem possible for the court to strike it down.
And I don't think the court would have to strike it down, because you're taking money, divvying it up equitably, equally to all voters. They get to decide what they want to do with that. However, you can't, as you said, because of Citizens United, you cannot tell someone that they cannot give money to a political campaign. Mm-hmm. So you'll have people who will just give whatever the government has provided, and then there will be others who will give more.
And thank you for raising that, Bruce, because this is, I think, one of the more powerful objections to it's not a claim that the reform is bad, but you're kind of advancing the reason why it wouldn't really solve the problem. And our answer to that question is that yes, people can still offer candidates as much money or independent financial help as they want, but candidates who benefit from it and accept it will find that this aid is politically toxic, because a candidate, let's say that I decide to fund my campaign with voter dollars through this voter and election system, and my opponent is taking all this money from Charles Koch or George Soros, whoever your favorite villain is. Well, and then I get to say in debates and in my ads and to everyone who will listen, I'm here to serve you, which is why I take my campaign funds from you. My opponent would rather be a stooge for corporate interests. And in fact, this has actually happened. This happened in Seattle. Seattle has had this kind of system, they call it democracy vouchers, since 2017 for municipal elections. In 2018, Jeff Bezos and his cronies decided they wanted to purchase a city council that was more to their liking, and they invested $1.5 million, an unprecedented amount, in 7 city council races, and it completely backfired because this system in Seattle was passed as a ballot initiative in 2015, and through the run-up to that ballot initiative, the voters of Seattle had come to understand that their democracy vouchers were, sort of key to their influence in their government, and they understood how destructive money in politics is, and so the media and the public, everyone was totally outraged, and the Bezos candidates went down to defeat. We don't have a crystal ball, but I'm confident that will happen at the federal level, because again, every candidate who relies on voter dollars, on money from us, from the people, has a endlessly powerful argument against any opponent who takes corporate money or billionaires' money going forward. You can imagine like putting up on your own website, my opponent, with a picture of your opponent with a big ugly yellow sign across the lower third saying for sale. And then you can click on this link, find out who owns my opponent, which interests, where is he taking his money. And so we think, and I think we have justification, and the Seattle example is encouraging, that political incentives will effectively drive most of this private money out of the system. Obviously, we won't know that until we try it.
But what about PACs?
The PACs will still be there. PACs are just one vehicle for money to come into the system to benefit candidates.
Politicians cannot control what a PAC does. That's the law. Well,
no, but I mean, if a candidate, the thing is, though, again, let's say that a candidate is getting, what you're talking about in particular is super PACs, which were made possible by Citizens United and by Speech Now, which was a Court of Appeals case in the District of Columbia Circuit, both in 2010. It's this organization, it's sort of to which individuals and corporations can donate unlimited sums of money, and then the PAC can spend unlimited sums helping a candidate they like or hurting a candidate they want to hurt. Mm-hmm. But again, if my opponent is getting all this help from some super PAC, again, it's like, well, look who owns my opponent. My opponent is benefiting from this corporate money. And is my opponent disavowing this or not? So it's, I think fundamentally, once the American people, and the other thing is, we're not going to get this will not become law. Congress is not going to give us this system until most Americans know about this reform and a clear majority of the American people support it. So it is really going to have to be, we're going to have to find a way to put this issue on the national agenda in a presidential election year so that that it's elevated that high as an issue. Okay. But I also think that's eminently possible because it is simple, it's straightforward, it's common sense, and would have a tremendous impact. And because, again, the American people are so thoroughly fed up and so ready for a change.
Now, the only example that I can think of a change in the electoral system was the election of senators going from state senates voting for federal senators to popular election for
That's right.
federal
The
senators.
17th Amendment, I believe.
Yeah, and exactly. There had to be an amendment to the Constitution. Now, can this happen by law, or does it have to be an amendment?
Simple act of Congress. It doesn't require, you don't have to change the Constitution to get it. And again, it makes an end run around the constitutional objections that have, moved the Supreme Court to strike down all these limits on spending. And it's a simple act of Congress that probably wouldn't run to more than, say, 40 pages. In fact, there have been a couple of draft bills, and that's about how long they are. Because again, it's so simple. All you really need is you set up kind of a single national website with wire transfer instructions connecting, the Federal Reserve banks to accounts, and then every registered voter gets to set up their. I mean, there's a significant IT problem to set it up at the beginning.
I don't even want to think about the cybersecurity.
Well, I wouldn't want to think about that IT problem because technology terrifies me,
Yeah.
and so on. But the reality is, it's eminently doable.
Well, the government already has everybody's bank account.
But that's right. Well, they're not going. In any case, they're not going to be drawing from personal bank accounts. It would have to be funding going to bank accounts of politicians' campaigns. But in any case,
no. But the money going to the person to distribute to the campaign of their choice. That would be an account that the government would set up. It wouldn't be money that they would deposit in the person's personal bank account.
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I tend to think that probably they wouldn't need to actually. I mean, basically, every voter in their voter-owned elections account, their online account, would have basically a set of credits. This is how much money you're able to spend.
Well, you couldn't give somebody the money in their bank account because then they wouldn't spend it on the
well, that's right.
Campaign.
You wouldn't put it into people's personal bank accounts. Yeah. Absolutely not.
Because so you have to create.
This money can only be spent to donate to candidates to make sure that candidates are getting their campaign cash from the American people instead of from special interests.
Now, individual giving would still exist.
That's right.
The super PACs would still exist.
That's right.
The only new component would be federal dollars being distributed by individual voters to the candidates of their choice.
That's right.
Okay. I'm going to put up your contact information because I have one final question for you.
Okay.
Is there, let me put us up here. Is there anything that I did not ask you that you wish I had asked you? And if I had asked you, what would you have said?
I think, if you'd asked me, what's the worst thing that money in politics has done to us? And my answer to that is that what money in politics has done is that it has over time led everyone in politics, but particularly candidates or potential candidates, to censor themselves so as not to say anything that might alienate potential donors. And as election campaigns have gotten more and more expensive, and the cost has truly skyrocketed in the last 10 years since Citizens United, so many issues, ideas, policies are basically off the table and not up for discussion and not part of the conversation, and indeed not even in our imagination, because by default, the donors select the candidates we're allowed to vote for, and the ideas that these candidates can advocate, and it's now gotten to the point where the need to raise cash and therefore not to alienate donors and therefore the imperative to censor oneself if you're a candidate has kind of sucked all the life out of our political conversation, and which is why our political conversation is almost completely empty and why the messaging of the parties has become so overwhelmingly negative. Because now, since the need to appease donors blocks almost anything we might do to make our country stronger, all the parties have left to offer us is anger. And that, I think, is also why we're seeing this intense polarization and partisan anger that is so destructive and so dangerous. So that was I guess the question, and that's about as short as an answer as I can make. I could, of course, go on for hours about how damaging money has been, but I think I've taken enough of your time and your audience's time as it is. So
Well, I thank you. I would make one suggestion, however, to our viewers. I'm sure you've already done this, but as we're approaching the season of debates, read the Lincoln Douglas debates, which were for Senate, not for president, but they knew how to debate. Those were real debates, not the nonsense that we have on television today.
Bruce, I couldn't agree with you more. I don't feel like we've had real debates since maybe 1980, you know?
Right. Dan, I thank you very much for coming on. This has been interesting. It's also been unique. I haven't had a guest on a subject like this before, and I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad you were the guest. So
I thank you very much for the opportunity, Bruce, for this chance to put my ideas before the American people. And, one other thing I would say that's unique about me is that I've got to be one of the only politically engaged people who actually who's optimistic, who believes that, we're probably going to turn this around in sort of a reasonable time frame and get the country moving again. So it's nice to be able to spread that kind of message with all the gloom and doom out there.
Well, I thank you.
I thank you too, Bruce, very much.
I'm Bruce Hurwitz. Thank you for watching. And as always, please stay focused on success.